Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chevaliers Online. We're so excited to have you here tonight for a very special evening with Jane Smiley and David Francis. You're going to have a chance to ask questions at the end of the night, but just as a quick courtesy note, please keep your microphone muted until then. But now, please join me in welcoming our really fabulous guests. We're here for a conversation of Jane Smiley's latest novel, Perestroika in Paris. Jane probably needs no introduction, but just in case, she is the author of numerous novels, including the Pulitzer Prize-winning A Thousand Acres and most recently the Last 100 Years trilogy. She's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and has also received Penn Center's Lifetime Achievement Award for Literature. She's going to be in conversation tonight with David Francis, who is the author of The Great Inland Sea and Stray Dog Winter. He's taught creative writing at UCLA, Occidental College, and in the Masters of Professional Writing program at USC. And he is also a co-chair of PEN America's Los Angeles Committee. Jane and David, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Hi, Jane. It's good to see you.
Hello. I wish we could get together.
I know, it's sad. As a precursor, I just wanted to announce that I am recently married, and for my wedding present, Jane gifted me the sweater that I'm wearing, which is my wallpaper. And just on the notion of Jane as a gifted and versatile creature, I wanted to first talk about your likeness in a way to this might sound dicey at first, but stick with me. A horse that one day does dressage, but then does the 3-day event, and then is doing pony club, and then the Grand Prix. In that, your writing career encompasses all these different genres and styles, and fiction and nonfiction. And speaking of the sweater, I mean, you even wrote a book about crafting in the Catskills a long time ago. So Jane has written, I think, 30 books.
Something like that, 31 something.
31. And what's amazing to me is that she's written 22 of them since 2000, which, I mean, I work quite hard and I've written 3. So that is kind of intimidating and very impressive. And
tonight, well, I have to say that 8 of them are young adult novels, so they're a little shorter.
Well, that's the Pony Club horse that you.
Yes, that's the Pony Club horse.
That's part of the versatility. And I don't know that there are many writers. I was just trying to think of a writer who has the breadth of publishing through fiction and nonfiction and young adult. I couldn't think of anyone. I think you're maybe in a class of your own. Anyway, let's pretend you are, unless you can think of anyone. So here tonight we're talking about Perestroika in Paris. And if you haven't read it yet, I don't know how many of you have it and have read it. It really is a treat in this time of hardship and pandemic. It is a joy to read, and for me, as someone who's very cynical about anthropomorphizing and fantasy in a way, it's kind of a realistic fantasy set in Paris, and I'll just read a very quick description of it. This delightful, heartwarming tale about creatures living in the rough in Paris's Champ de Mars is something new for Smiley, and it's an appealing balm for harsh times. The animals, her titular racehorse, who converses with an elegant short-haired German pointer, a haughty raven, a squabbling pair of mallards, and a rat pining for a mate, share their hardships, fears, needs, and dreams. They also overcome their differences and prejudices to band together to lend a paw, claw, wing, or hoof to each other, and eventually a lonely, orphaned 8-year-old boy. So Jane, just to get us going, perhaps you could tell us how this this fable novel came into being in the context of having written the trilogy, those 3 dramatic, historical, heavyweight novels.
Well, actually, this began before the trilogy. I was in Paris, and I had visited this incredibly interesting racehorse trainer who's actually American, named Gina Rarick. She's from Wisconsin. And how she ended up being a racehorse trainer is a story I hope someday she tells. anyway, we had been to visit her place in Maison Lafitte, and we went into town, and we went to the Place de Trocadero, which is on the west side of the Seine, up a pretty steep hill, and is really beautiful with great views of the city. And we were having the best French onion soup in the history of the world. And I said to my husband, you know, wouldn't it be fun if I wrote a book about a horse that escapes into Paris? Now, on the west side of the city, in the Place de Trocadero, that is not that difficult because it isn't it isn't very far from a couple of racetracks and the Bois de Boulogne. And so I decided, okay, why not? I'll try it. And I became so in love with it that I just kept going. And I thought, boy, they're going to have to publish this one after I'm dead. But I managed to get my my editor interested too. So we had fun.
Well, I mean, it is an audacious feat to have pulled it off, I think, because the voices are so resonant and kind of there's a joyfulness in the novel, which is, I think, very hard to do. And as a novelist, it's not where I go. And I'm really profoundly impressed that you were able to do it. And when I think of Paris, and if I was going to write a book about a horse loose in Paris, I probably would have maybe gone to the Bois de Boulogne or Père Lachaise in the cemetery or somewhere in the periphery. But you put Paris, who escapes from Auteuil. Is that where?
Yeah, Auteuil.
And it's not that far, but it's also not that secluded. But then it is winter.
It is winter, and you know, the good thing about that side of the city is that area above the hill is across from the Champ de Mars, which is a beautiful big open space. And so I think it is a more likely setting than some other places in the city. But of course it's winter, so
and also the Champ de Mars in winter isn't lit, as I recall. So at nighttime, at least, there's a lot of possibility. Yeah, and also there's the scope for her to interact with people there and neighborhoods, and she discovers this extraordinary old house where a young boy lives, and also she coincides with a raven and a rat. Maybe you could just run through the characters and tell us where they came from in your imagination.
Well, Paris came from my horse, Perestroika, who is a curious horse. When I first was writing this, she was about, let's see, in 2009, she was about 4 or 5 years old. And she was always a curious girl. If there was a mounting block with a lid, she'd go open the lid. And I don't think she was looking for goodies. I think she just wanted to know what was in there, you know. If I go for a walk, she's looking up, she's wondering, you know, she's looking around. She's not acting spooky, she's just curious. The dog character is based on my German short hair pointer, who was not a stray, or, you know, she was not a busker's dog. She was our dog. But she did have this look when she was lying on her chair. She did have this look of despair, which I always said was existential angst, you know, because she was German.
And because you have Jack Russell's, probably.
Well, that could have been it.
Could have been post-traumatic Jack Russell trauma.
Yeah, that could easily have been it. And then the other animals are just ones. So I, of course, had to do a lot of research, and I had to walk around the Champ de Mars, and I had to walk around the neighborhood. And there were animals that I noticed, and a lot of them were ravens. Yak, 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 caw, caw, caw. So I said there has to be a raven. And then there are 2 ponds. They might be large. They might have been larger then than they are now. I'm not sure, because they've been building up around the Eiffel Tower. recently, but there were these ponds with ducks in them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked up mallards and I thought those would be fun. And then, of course, we all know that in a really old house that's not very well taken care of, there has to be rats. So I put some rats in there. So those are the animals.
And
people.
And the animals communicate or talk amongst each other,
Mm-hmm.
but the humans do not. Humans talk and communicate with the animals only by look and feel.
Yes. Now, when I wrote the first draft, the animals spoke English and the humans spoke French. And my editor said she didn't think this was going to go over big. So so I took that out. But maybe that's how I would have expressed, the animal-human problems of interaction. But the humans were pretty much locally based or practical. So if you're standing at the Eiffel Tower and you're looking toward the École Militaire, which is at the far end.
The south.
Yeah. You will, to your left, there'll be one set of shops.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go to a vegetable shop, which is right next door to a meat cutter shop. Mm-hmm. On those roads. And I did, try this and try that in terms of pastries just to make sure, And then on the other side, there are some other streets. And one of them had this bakery and that's where I put one of the characters. So those are the people who live nearby, and they represent actual shops that are nearby. There's also a caretaker for the Champ de Mars, and there's a few others. So that
the caretaker who notices suspicious plastic on occasion, which is not unusual.
Suspicious droppings, yeah.
Not as unusual. It's more unusual than it used to be, let's say.
Well, he grew up in the countryside, so he doesn't mind a few droppings. He likes them. Mm-hmm. And so as I wandered, and I did a lot of research, as I said, so as I wandered around, I thought, well, what would be likely and what would be unlikely? I knew there had to be a boy. I knew there had to be someone who was obsessed with horses, mm-hmm. who wanted to own the horse, who had noticed the horse. And then I had to figure out how that boy got to be so free. Mm-hmm. And so I gave him a great-great-grandmother with a pretty tragic life. And so I gave him the independence to basically do what he wants to with the horse. Because that's who I wanted to be when I was 9, I wanted a horse to be right next to me. I wanted to do whatever I wanted with the horse. And, so he's me the way I wished I was.
Can you talk about being inspired by Silver Birch? Was that the name of the?
Yes.
I don't know why I know that.
So when I was growing up, there were all kinds of horse books, and some were written by quite good authors who were also wonderful artists. And one of them was, one of the artists was a guy named C.W. Anderson. But one of the books was not written by him, but one of the ones I clearly remember was called Silver Birch. And it was about a girl who lives on a farm in Wisconsin in the woods. And for some reason, there's a horse running free in the woods. And she does the thing that we all want to do, those of us who don't have our own horses, she goes out and tames the horse and claims the horse. And when I was a kid, this seemed totally normal to me. And I kept looking for that horse to come down the street, as if.
Yeah,
but for some reason, that horse never came down the street. I don't know why. But I believed, and I loved silver birch because of that. I grew up wanting a horse friend, and I had dogs. Especially my first dog was a Cocker Spaniel, but she was nippy. She didn't want to be my dog friend. Mm-hmm. And I thought maybe, I could have this horse friend. And then it turned out that I knew people after I was about 11, and my mother and I moved with my stepfather to a new place. There were actually people nearby who had horse friends. And one day the fantasy came true. I looked out in the backyard and there was a horse standing in the backyard.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out that it had escaped from some people who were neighbors who lived about a half a mile away, who kept horses on their property. And that girl, who was slightly older than I was, we called her and she came and got the horse, but then she took me for a trail ride along this creek that was below our house. So that was almost what I wanted, but I didn't get to keep the horse.
But that was the beginning of a lifetime passion with horses. And it reminds me of your evolution through horses. That's a little bit reflected in the book. Your life with race horses and breeding and having not 100 horses, but far too many.
No.
But in the book, Paris says the thrill of racing seemed like a part of the past. And I sense that also for you, you've had the horses of your childhood, and then it's branched out into this racing world and owning a lot of horses and breeding and riding a lot of horses. And then it's narrowed again. And my sense is, as it narrows, as my own horse life has, there is a sort of reconnection. And maybe you always had this, but this reconnection with communicating with horses that allowed you to see Paris and these animals in the book, and you use their voices as vehicles to express their experiences.
Well, one of the things I learned from the breeding that I did, and all the horses that I bred were related to one another through a grandsire who'd been a very good racehorse, but also had quite a reputation for being a gentle, kind guy, and who had lived until he was 35, I think. And so because my horses were like cousins and second cousins to one another, I thought it was really interesting to watch them and to see which qualities they shared and which qualities they didn't share. And they actually shared more qualities than they didn't share. They were all attentive. They were all kind. They were all a little spooky. They were all athletic. They could all jump like crazy. But they were thoroughbreds. It was easy to overstimulate them, and that's what got me interested in sort of the inner lives of my horses, and then of horses in general, I have to say.
You said at some stage, you have, with thoroughbreds in particular, you have to understand the world as they are seeing it. Riding horses, especially thoroughbreds, you have to sense the energy in their bodies, what they like or don't like. And also you observe something that maybe is true and I don't know, but in Perestroika in Paris, you mention that horses are farsighted, which had never occurred to me, or Paris was farsighted. Can you talk about that?
Some are, some aren't. And I had one of my horses who I was quite fond of. He loved to jump, but as he approached a jump, he would be just real nervous. Mm-hmm. And if he went around the course, he would be nervous approaching every single jump. And one time I was riding him, the only time he ever got me off, I was riding him. We walked over a pole and the sun was behind us. And he saw our shadow in front of us crossing the pole, and he spooked and I fell off. And I was fine. But I could not figure out why he was like that, because once he had done the course, he would go around it as smooth as he possibly could. And then I remembered going and visiting him on the day after he was born. He was born in the middle of the night. And I remembered going and seeing him, and he was not standing with the mom. He was standing over by the fence looking off into the distance, which I thought was a really odd thing for such a young foal to be doing. And then somewhere I read that horses had different types of sight, and that some were farsighted. And I thought, well, he's the perfect candidate for that, because the things he could see in the distance didn't scare him, but the things that he couldn't understand nearby might scare him unless he was really used to them.
And that kind of understanding of animals, I think, is something that you've really explored in your horse life. And in mine, as a former show jumping rider and representing my country doing that sort of stuff, I've always been involved with training horses, schooling horses, and controlling horses. And now in my dotage, I'm in equine therapy, working with a donkey and learning to communicate in a different way. And it's so interesting and revealing for me.
Well, let me say one more thing. When I moved from Iowa to California, we came here to Carmel Valley. And almost the first person I met, and I brought my horse with me that I had. And one of the first people I met was a guy named Ray Berta. And he was a student. I wouldn't call him a student, but he had learned a lot from a local pair of brothers, Tom and Bill Dorrance. And they had come up with a new way of training horses that was much more cooperative and much more kind, but also more, I don't know, insightful into the way that horses were seeing things. And so it wasn't about controlling horses. It was about being allies with the horses and having the horse accept the things that you wanted to do. And I thought it was utter genius. And the kids books that I wrote, the 8 kids books, they explore a lot of what the Dorrance brothers talked about. And I hadn't known that before I moved here. So it was a great place to come to, because this was where it all started.
Right. And I'll also add that Jane, from her racing experience, wrote a wonderful novel called Horse Heaven that many of you may have read. And then also a nonfiction book called A Year at the Race, which is the story of a racehorse during a year, needless to say. Jane, maybe it would be a nice opportunity to read a little bit about Paris and Frida as they enter Paris.
Well,
before we go prattling about horses for hours.
Yes, we're so tempted to do that. So after Frida gets out of Auteuil and heads into Paris, she comes to the Place de Trocadero, and it's after dark, it's late at night. And Frida is a German short hair, very good looking German short hair pointer, whose owner it has been a guitar playing busker. And he's actually been a very good musician, so he's made a lot of money, but he was very solitary and isolated. And so he has now died. So Frida is alone, and they meet in the Place de Trocadero. And of course, Frida notices something that Paris doesn't understand, but Frida understands it. And that's what we're going to read about. Frida slid in her quietest and most bird-stalking manner toward the purse. Nose out, head down, ears pricked, the horse continued to munch the grass. Maybe if the purse had had a zipper, Frida would never have been able to open it, and this story would have happened differently. Delphine would have found Paris and taken her home to Maison Lafitte, and Frida would have had to think of some other way to gain a friend. But in fact, the purse had a magnetic snap and opened quite easily, Once the flap was open, Frida pushed the purse a little bit with her nose so that the contents were revealed, and what she saw in there was money. Yes, there was also a lip gloss and a hairbrush, but mostly there was money made of paper in all shades. A dog sees red as brown and blue as blue, green as pale yellow. She knew which ones Jacques found exciting. Frida did not have much experience with the palest one, but once, outside of Saint-Michel station, when Jacques had been playing and singing, a tall man in pointed-toed boots and a big hat had walked by, stopped to listen to the entire song and said, "Thanks, brother," then dropped one of those pale notes into the bowl. Jacques had to snatch it up before it blew away. Now Frida nudged the flap closed and stepped back. She bumped smack into the horse's front legs. The horse was standing over her, staring down at her. That was how interesting the money was. She hadn't even heard the horse approach. Frida froze, and the horse sniffed her, snorting a little bit, which was frightening, but not showing her teeth. Frida cleared her throat and sat with dignity, she thought. The horse touched noses with Frida, then put her nose on the purse. Frida knew this meant, "The purse is mine." Frida sneezed. She often did this when she was nervous. Finally, she managed to say, "Are you lost?" The horse said, "I don't know." Frida said, "Are you from around here?" The horse said, "I don't know." Frida had never been to the race course, even though it was only a few kilometers away. Frida said, "What's your name?" The horse said, "They call me Paris, but my real name is Perestroika by Moscow Ballet out of Mapleton by Big Spruce. I am a descendant of Northern dancer and herberger and go all the way back to Saint-Simon on my dam's side." "What does that mean?" said Frida. "Those are my ancestors. Some were very good racehorses. Did one come from Moscow?" "Where is Moscow?" "It's in Russia. You can hear people speaking Russian right here in Paris." Frida had heard her human, Jacques, and another busker talking about this from time to time. They said that Russians love Paris. She said, "You must know that perestroika is a Russian word." "I didn't know that," said Paris. She'd thought it was a nonsense word like giddy up or wowsy dowsy. It had a sharp rhythm too, like the rhythm of a good trot. Frida began to think that maybe the horse didn't know what she had in her purse either. Paris said, "I'm a filly, 3 years old, soon to be a mare." Frida said, "Filly, mare?" "Female." Frida thought, "You think I don't know that just by your scent?" But she didn't say anything. The sun was now completely up, but nothing was going on in the Place du Trocadero, which never came alive until lunchtime anyway. Frida picked up the handle of the purse in her teeth and walked away to the part of the grassy area where not so many humans might see them. Paris followed her. Frida dropped the purse in the grass for now. Frida sat and regarded the horse. She said, "What do you eat?" The horse glanced around and said, "What do you eat?" "Oh, it depends. Sometimes a little onion soup, a bit of steak if I'm lucky, lots of bread, cheese, old croque monsieur, the occasional leg of chicken or lamb, bones. It's a varied diet around here, heavy on the cheese." "Oats, maize, hay, apples, carrots?" "Well, the Patisserie Carrette has some nice apple tarts and they serve grated carrots on some of the salads, but it's expensive." "What does that mean?" Frida regarded the horse some more. She was so big and yet so dumb. Well, innocent was a better word.
That's terrific. And it must have been such fun exploring that part of Paris and seeing the venues and imagining the creatures. I mean, that's just heaven.
I love that side of the city, partly because it's up the slope, and so you can look out over the rest of the city.
Right.
And also because there's some interesting things there, like the Balzac Museum, that's on the west side. and they have so many displays of the writings of Balzac. And once you've looked at all the displays of Balzac, if you're a writer, you will never complain ever, ever, ever again.
Which it doesn't make me think of, but I was thinking when you were reading of how that purse is kind of carried through the novel, and how the emotionality of the story just quietly builds. And at the end, I found myself quite tearful, which I totally didn't expect.
No.
I won't say how or where, but it has a surprising emotionality. And while it's a book of pleasantness, mostly, there is a vague air of that something bad might happen, the authorities might appear, or something might happen in the night, or one of the animals might get stuck. So there's this tension that builds, and with the emotionality, and it's a really unusual and great experience. So there are also some amazing names in the book. I think about the Jack Russell called Assassin.
Well, she works at the racetrack, and she knows her job is to catch rats.
Was that a real dog? Did you make that up?
I made that up. We did have we've had 2 Jack Russells, and one was named Casey and one was named Fallon, but sometimes we called him Felon. But we just couldn't believe, especially with Casey, the female, how athletic she was and how quick she was. She could climb a tree just like she was a cat, you know.
Yeah.
One time, the only time I ever saw her do something unbelievable was when I was walking out on the porch of the house where we used to live, and she was pretty young at that point. I think she was about 1.5 years. And she suddenly jumped through the ran out onto the branch of a tree and grabbed a bird.
Wow.
And I thought, I have never seen a dog do that. That's a cat thing. But she was totally fun, and we were crazy about her. And so I had to put a Jack Russell in.
Even if she sent Frida to the sad house. And then you have a racehorse obliquely called Alpha. I mentioned this the other time we spoke, called Alpha Bazik, which I think is the most terrific racehorse name ever. And I looked it up and I couldn't find it. You must have plucked that from thin air.
Yeah, I don't know why I put that in there. I thought that was a real guy, but I don't know why I put that in there.
And then even the humans, there are the Delphine and Rainier. Is it Rainier?
I think it's Rania.
Rania. And there's Anais and Pierre the gardener. There's this.
Well, I have to talk about Anais. Anais is a bakery. It works in a bakery. And actually, one of my favorite flavors is anise or licorice. So I just had to put that in there. So because I love that flavor.
And then there's a sort of brash American racehorse called Jesse James, and Paris observes how the snooty racehorses always talk about breeding, but interestingly, she does the same when she
yes, of course. What else is there to talk about?
I thought it was funny. So did you purposefully imagine it as a kind of fable, or it was that? And how do you feel about it?
I didn't have a goal. I just wanted to keep on writing and see what happened. I didn't imagine it as a young adult novel. I didn't imagine it as a fantasy. I didn't imagine it as a fable. I just wanted to go on and on and on and see what happened and how it came out.
Well, it certainly is sort of genre bending. And what did your editor make of it when you talked about it, and then when you presented it?
Well, she was quite wrapped up in the the last 100 Years trilogy.
Right.
So she pretty much set it aside. But about, I guess, a year and a half ago now, when I came up with the idea of publishing it after the election this year, which I knew would be chaotic, I said, you know, go back and look at this one again and let me know what you think, because I think that's maybe what we should do. And so she did, and she went back and looked at it again, and she loved it. And she had wonderful ideas about how to fiddle with it. So yeah, we saw eye to eye on this one completely.
And the election would seem kind of like a strange time to have it come out. And yet it's had this total life of its own as a kind of antidote to the whole election mishigas.
Well, most of the books I've ever written have been fairly political.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could say that even Horse Heaven had its political aspects.
In a sort of in a satirical kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, there he goes.
George. I think he should write his own damn book if he wants.
Yeah, what a beauty. And I didn't want to publish a political book at the time of the election. You know, I did the best I could with the last 100 years to sort of analyze politics in America. Mm-hmm. And I think I said everything I had to say about it in that book. And anyway, I liked this one and I wanted it out there.
And there is a theme of freedom. And Raoul, who's the raven, who's kind of snooty and intellectual and imperious in his raven-esque way, he says freedom was what he cared about. Like most worldly creatures of his degree of maturity, but youth cared about power, which I thought was an interesting observation. And there are pithy statements and opinions that particularly Raoul has, mm-hmm. but the characters have their own way of seeing things, and it's a really unique way of hearing those opinions.
One thing we all have to know and remember about animals, especially if they're living in the wild in groups.
George.
I love that. Especially if they're living in the wild in groups, they have hierarchies and they have ways of getting along and they have ways of getting, surviving. And one of the things that fascinates me about horses is that there's been a lot more research into how horses think and how horses behave mm-hmm. than there used to be when we were kids. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I remember reading about some years ago, not too long, was that in a horse herd, the jobs are doled out just the way they are in any human group. And some horses are the boss, those are usually mares. And some horses are called sentinel horses. And that's what I thought my horses might have been, because they were so alert to what was going on. And the other thing I've always noticed about a herd of horses, if you see them galloping down the hill together, they don't bump into each other. They don't, they know where the other ones are. It may look like chaos to us, but it doesn't look like chaos. It doesn't feel like chaos to them. And so I think horses are a lot more intelligent than they've been given credit for. The horse I'm riding now is part thoroughbred and part French warm blood. And he might be the smartest horse I've ever seen. And he's very aware of what I'm thinking. I thought, okay, I'm going to teach him some commands. It didn't take any teaching. all I had to do was say it once, indicate it with my reins or my body. And that's all he ever needed. He knew it after that one time. So I think horses have not gotten much credit for being as smart as they are. And I think once you start giving them credit, once you start trusting them, once you start treating them like sentient and intelligent beings, then that's how they act.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're nearly done with our chat. So if you have questions, get them ready. But I'll just ask one more thing around the animals. There is also a theme, I thought, of acceptance, about how the rat and the raven and the horse and the dog, how they navigate the world with each other and are accepting of each other and their frailties and their strengths. And Kurt the rat at one stage says, why do humans like horses and not rats? And it made me think about how sort of arbitrary it is as to what animals we've decided are okay and what aren't. It's like, who decides, what are the plants and what are the weeds? There's something arbitrary around that. And this sort of the notion of accepting all of these different animals and allowing a rat to be a creature that's worthy of exploring.
Well, I know a couple of people who have had or have pet rats, mm-hmm. and who have noticed how smart they are. Mm-hmm. And so, I did want to put a rat in because I wanted there to be this, I wanted to redeem right. Ratness a little bit.
Right.
Actually, the ones that are hard to handle are Sid and Nancy. They're the Mallards.
Oh, the Mallards, yes. They're quite they're sort of a handful, the Mallards, and loud.
Well, they are. And I do believe that they are the actual reincarnation of Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen.
Which of course is the other fantastic name. Yes, the Mallards called Sid and Nancy. If folks have any questions, they can enter them in the chat and we can, it looks like they're, or I can ask any more, or you can just chime up from the gallery there if you would like, unmute.
I'll go into gallery view, and anybody who wants to ask, please do, because I love answering questions. So
because otherwise we'll go on talking about horses.
I see Birch and J and V. Who wants to go first?
Why don't we let J and V go first? And
okay, sorry about that. I share this Zoom with my husband. So I'm Jennifer. I'm really excited to hear from you about this book. I have not read it yet, but I'd like to know about the process about writing about animals versus writing about people. Is there a different process? Did you find yourself kind of mapping the story out differently? Did it come about more organically based on your relationships with your animals versus people? Just kind of, what was the difference?
It was just sort of natural. I mean, as David can attest, if you don't want to fall off your horse, you have to be aware of how your horse is thinking, how your horse is feeling. And if you've ridden a lot of horses and a lot of other riders, you know that it's automatic to talk about your horses as if they have consciousness. And so it's only one more step to go and write this kind of book about the horses. So it wasn't that different. It was just a form of exploration.
May I ask, hi, I'm Bert, and I wanted to thank both of you for this really marvelous conversation. I've been excited for the last 2 weeks when I understood that you guys were going to be doing this. So thank you very much. Can I ask you to wade into a cultural a battle that I'm seeing now, which strikes me as particularly relevant, since you are one part of your life an academic, and in the rest of your life an extraordinary and prolific writer. There's been a lot of back and forth now about the role of critics and the role of criticism. And I wonder how you, as an academic and a teacher at UC Riverside, go about explaining and exploring the role of criticism and critic, and how you, as this extraordinary writer, react when you read criticism, if you do, of your work.
Well, I write a fair number of reviews. When I assign books to my students, which of course I always do, I ask them to write about the books in an analytical way so that they can understand how the books work. I don't want them to talk about whether they liked it or not. I want them to talk about what they learned about how they work. When I do a workshop, either undergraduate or graduate, I also want them to talk in an analytical way about each other's work. So they can't say, oh, this is really good, or this is really bad, or I didn't like this. They have to say, okay, in this part of the story, why did you do blah, blah, blah? And then the next week, everybody turns in another draft of that story in which they try to answer some of those questions by changing things around. And so they turn in several drafts of each story, and then they do a number of stories. And so what they learn is that their stories are kind of like a puzzle, that it's very interesting and pleasurable to solve. They don't learn, I hope, at least in my class, that it's their job when they're writing to please others. And I learned early on in my career that critics are critics, and they have their own opinions and they have their own preferences. And it's almost, it's like the person who has been assigned to do the review of your book isn't necessarily the person who's going to like it. But that's okay. That what critics do is create the conversation around the book, and you hope it's going to be a positive conversation, but that shouldn't deter you from going on and writing another book.
Jane, I noticed that the New York Times said, if you're looking for a good escape, try this. Which I think is a wonderful sort of brisk endorsement.
Yes, it was very sweet. There were a lot of pleasant and nice endorsements of it.
Great reviews, which is very exciting. Yeah. More questions. There's one in the chat.
Yes, we've got one from Grace, who's curious that even though you are the one and only Jane Smiley, was it hard to pitch a novel for adults featuring talking animals as the main characters?
I thought it would be, but it didn't turn out to be, because of the timing. And so my editor, she had read it a long time ago, not so much in the early stages, but when we were kind of in the midst of the last 100 years. And it wasn't one of her favorites then. But then when she came back to it, she liked it a lot more. So it wasn't hard to pitch it. And fortunately, my agent, who occasionally is my worst critic, she loved it. So she was on my side and she was willing to push it. But I will say that my agent, who's been my agent for years and has been a wonderful agent, when we were first starting out, I said, I think I want to write a book that's based on King Lear and it's set on a farm. And she said, on a farm? Nobody wants to read a book about a farm. So she learned her lesson too. Now they just roll their eyes. I've written so many different kinds of books that the agent and the editors, they just say, uh-oh, here comes another one. But they've been very kind and sweet to me.
I know that Stuart Miller in the LA Times said, Smiley is a serious writer, but she doesn't take herself too seriously as a person. And I think that's
How does he know?
I don't know. Do you know him?
Never met him.
But I'm wondering if you feel like writers are I think that there are writers who do take themselves very seriously, but I think you can take your work very seriously and not have to present yourself as uber serious all the time. I feel like sometimes there's a studied seriousness in authors because they feel like to be taken seriously, and maybe it's true, they need to come across as solemn and
That's not going to work for me because laughs, big loud laughs pop out of my mind, out of my mouth all the time. So if I were going to try to be serious and sober, I would probably look like a corpse.
Right. Okay. And maybe are you alive?
Oh yeah. Right. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, and maybe that's more of a male thing too. That sort of.
I don't know. There have been quite serious female writers. I don't know. I think it's just an inborn characteristic for people. You're not all that serious.
I was watching a short film about Virginia Woolf. She seemed reasonably serious. Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions? I see Davia.
Yeah, Davia.
Davia, excuse me.
I'm super excited. I'm like total fan. This is completely embarrassing. And on my screen, Jane, we're right next to each other. So I'm like, yes, I can almost touch you. So
are you going to pass me a little note or a piece of gum?
I am. I am.
All right. Thank you.
Wait, nobody else listen. This is just between me and Jane. There's a question I heard recently that I really like. So I wanted to ask you, what's something that people often get wrong about you?
They think I'm short.
Oh, yeah. But you don't seem short to me at all.
She's like 6 foot. What are you? 6'2"?
6'2".
Really tall. Yeah.
Wait, how tall?
So every so often I'll be among strangers and people will look up at me and say, "God, I didn't realize you were so tall." So
I met Jane in an elevator at the Sydney Writers' Festival 20 odd years ago. She was this woman towering above me, and I was on a panel.
You're at least 6 feet tall.
Okay, well, I'm just doing that for the purpose of the story. But okay. I said to her that I was a bit worried about reading Horse Heaven because have come from a horsey background. But when I read the way she described a horse's front leg, I knew I was in good hands, and we've been friends ever since.
Yes.
So we're coming up to around 7:55. Do we have any other folks who want to ask questions, or is there anything else, Jane, you would like to say or wish you had been asked? Anything you would like to say about Perestroika?
What I'm working on.
What are you working on now, Jane?
Well, one of the things that happened when this book came out was that my Hollywood agent said that it would never sell to Hollywood because there wasn't any bad guy in it. And it just so happened that I was finishing up the first good draft of a murder mystery set in Monterey in the 1850s. And it has some really bad guys in it. So that was really fun. I got to walk around Monterey and look around, and Monterey is a fascinating place. And I got to look up the history of Monterey and also California in the 1850s, which was also fascinating. And so that's what I've been working on.
And as far as a movie, I think Perestroika in Paris is quite filmic. I think it would make a lovely film.
Well, I hope so. That would be a great thing that would happen. I would love it.
I bet someone will snap it up for those purposes.
The only two movies that have been made from my work are 1,000 Acres and The Secret Lives of Dennis. And they were really, really dark. And so I would love to have a movie made from this, which is not dark.
Well, on that note, maybe there's a movie maker in our midst on this call. That being said, thank you, Jane.
Yeah, thank you, David.
When will the Monterey book be released? I just see a question.
I don't know. We're still in the editing stage, so we haven't gotten around to figuring out how long it's going to take.
Yeah, but just saying, it doesn't take Jane that long compared with the rest of us. I would just like to say what a pleasure it's been. I'd like to say Chevalier's is a fantastic bookstore. It's your local if you live in Hancock Park or anywhere in Los Angeles. They're in a beautiful new premises across the street from where they were. And I encourage you to go there and buy Perestroika in Paris and anything else you see that piques your interest.
And I definitely have to recommend Stray Dog Winter and
Wedding Bush Road. I guess we didn't mention my most recent novel, Wedding Bush Road, which I saw somewhere here, but now I can't see it.
Yes, he said Wedding Bush Road. That's the name of it, and it takes place in Australia. And it's a fascinating book.
Thank you, Jane. Jane Smiley blurbed it, and she doesn't blurb books, and she said it's his best book yet. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you, Chevaliers, and we will see you all again soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Jane and David. It's been an absolute pleasure. And one more note on Jane's book, if you want a signed book plate, we do have those available. So please either stop by the new store, with your mask on, or drop us a line at chevaliersbooks@gmail.com, or check us out online. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.